Welcome to English with Zenko Master. Get ready to learn something new today.
My name is Charlotte. This is the story of how two children fought to survive in one of the harshest places on Earth. I was not there when it happened, but I learned every detail from the people who found them and from the children themselves. It is a story I will never forget, because it shows how hope can survive even when everything else seems lost. It began with a crash. The small passenger plane was flying over Great Victoria Desert when something went wrong. No one knows exactly why, but the engines failed and the aircraft went down. The land below was dry, rocky, and endless. There were no houses, no roads, and no people. Only empty bushland, sharp stones, and the hot wind moving through the dry grass. When the wreckage finally stopped burning, there were only two survivors: Mary, a 13-year-old girl, and her 8-year-old brother, Peter. Smoke rose into the bright sky, carrying the bitter smell of fuel and fire. Mary's face was black with ash, her hands shaking, but she did not stop. She pulled Peter away from the wreck, shouting for him to run before the flames reached them. They ran as fast as their tired legs could carry them, through thick bushes that tore their clothes and scratched their arms. Ahead, they saw a line of low rocks and began to climb, using their hands to grip the warm stone. At the top, they stopped to catch their breath and looked back. The broken plane lay far below, flames still licking at its sides, smoke twisting into the sky like a dark ribbon. "Where are we?" Peter asked. His voice was small and frightened, almost lost in the wind. Mary did not answer. She did not know the exact place, only that it was somewhere deep in the desert. The truth was, they were lost in a land they did not understand. Far away in the city of Adelaide, their Uncle Keith was waiting at the airport. He had been excited to meet them. This was their first trip to Australia from their home in America. But the plane was late, very late. Hours passed, and the happy crowd in the arrivals hall grew worried. Then there were whispers. Someone mentioned a crash. Later, an official said the worst thing possible. There were no survivors. Back in the desert, the sun was sinking. The heat faded quickly, replaced by a sharp chill that crept into their bones. Mary and Peter climbed down between the rocks to find some shelter from the wind. Darkness spread fast, swallowing the land. There were no city lights, no sound of cars, only the endless silence of the outback. "It's all right," Mary whispered, wrapping her arms around Peter. He felt small and light in her arms. For a moment, the closeness made them both feel safer. "I'm hungry," Peter said after a while. His voice trembled. Mary searched the small bag she had grabbed from the plane. There was one chocolate bar, half melted from the sun. She split it in two and gave him half. They ate slowly, each bite small, knowing it was all they had. Peter soon fell asleep, but Mary stayed awake, her eyes scanning the shadows. In the stillness, she heard rustling nearby. A round, furry creature with short legs wandered close. It was a wombat. It sniffed at the children. its nose cold and damp, then moved away into the dark. Somewhere high above, a large bird cried out into the night, its call echoing across the empty land. When dawn came, the sky turned pale gold and pink. The desert was more colorful than Mary had imagined. Deep red earth, green plants clinging to life, and yellow flowers that opened in the morning light. She could see a narrow river in the distance, its surface reflecting the rising sun. That gave her hope. While Peter slept, Mary walked to the river to bathe. The cool water washed away the dust from her skin, and for a moment she forgot her fear. But the thought of food returned quickly. There was none. When Peter woke, he wanted to swim too. Mary warned him not to go too far because he could not swim well. He splashed near the rocks, laughing, but his fun ended when his stomach growled. The chocolate was almost gone. Mary knew they needed more food soon. They searched along the river bank for fish or fruit, but the fish were hiding in deep pools, and the trees nearby offered nothing to eat. As the sun climbed higher, they began to walk along the river, heading south. Mary remembered that Adelaide was in that direction. The journey was slow. At first, the ground was flat and open, but then thick plants blocked their way. Peter grew tired, and Mary let him rest in the shade of a tall tree, though the ground was still warm beneath them. Hours later, they reached higher ground. "Maybe we can see the sea from the top," Peter said, his face bright with hope. They climbed for hours, their hands sore from gripping the rocks. But when they reached the ridge, what they saw was not water. It was more desert, dry, endless, and shimmering under the fierce sun. Mary's heart sank. "We can't reach the sea today," she said softly. "Let's find a place to sleep." That night, they lay under the open sky. The stars looked close enough to touch, spread across the black sky like silver dust. Mary thought about their parents back in America and wondered if Uncle Keith knew they were alive. She also wondered how long they could survive without help. The next morning, they searched for food again. At last, Peter spotted a tree with small round fruits, some red, some green. Mary was cautious. Some wild fruits could be dangerous, but hunger pushed her to try. The green ones were bitter, but the red ones were sweet and full of juice. They filled their hands and ate until their stomachs no longer ached. While they were eating, Peter suddenly stopped. His eyes widened. "Mary, someone's here." A boy stood a short distance away. His skin was dark brown from the sun, and he wore no clothes. He carried a small animal in one hand, its body still and limp. His eyes were curious but calm. Mary froze, unsure what to do. She had never seen anyone like him before. At home in South Carolina, everyone wore shoes and shirts, but here in this wild place, the boy seemed as much a part of the land as the rocks and trees. He stepped closer, touching Peter's face and hair as if studying him. Then he looked at Mary in the same way, his gaze steady but not unkind. They did not share a language, but his smile felt like a sign of peace. Peter pointed south. "Adelaide," he said. "Uncle Keith. Do you know?" The boy tilted his head, not understanding the words. But when Peter mimed drinking from cupped hands, the boy's eyes lit up. He made the same gesture and said a word neither of them knew. Then he pointed into the distance and waved for them to follow. Mary hesitated. The boy was a stranger, but he might know where water and food could be found. In the desert, that was more important than anything else. "Come on," Peter urged, already stepping forward. Mary took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "All right," she said at last. And together they followed the boy into the wide, hot desert, not knowing where the path would lead. The boy walked ahead of them with a quick, light step. His bare feet made almost no sound on the dry ground, and he seemed to know exactly where to place them so he would not trip or stumble. Mary and Peter tried to follow his pace, but they were slower. Their shoes crunched against the sand and loose stones, sending up small clouds of dust that stung their throats. The sun was already high. Heat pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. Mary could feel the sweat on her back, soaking into her shirt. The air was so dry that it seemed to steal the moisture from her skin. Every time she opened her mouth to speak, it felt like sandpaper against her tongue. They moved between tall clumps of spinifex grass and over flat rocks that glowed warm from the sun. Sometimes the boy would stop suddenly, kneel down, and touch the ground. His fingers moved over the sand as if reading a secret message. Then he would nod to himself, rise, and change direction without saying a word. Peter tried to speak to him again. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice hopeful. The boy turned his head for only a moment, his dark eyes glancing at Peter, but he said nothing. Mary guessed he didn't understand English at all. She wondered what language he did speak, and whether they could learn even a few words from him. After more walking, the ground dipped between two low hills. Here, a cluster of small trees grew, their leaves pale and dusty. In the middle was a shallow pool of water, no bigger than a large bowl. Mary's heart jumped. She and Peter ran to it, kneeling, beside the edge. But before they could drink, the boy held out his hand to stop them. He crouched, scooped a little water into his palm, and let it drip back slowly. Then he shook his head and tapped his stomach before making a pained face. "He's saying it will make us sick," Mary guessed. Peter frowned. "But I'm so thirsty." The boy left them wondering for only a moment. From a small woven pouch at his side, he pulled out a bundle of dried plant stems. He broke them open, revealing soft, damp fibers inside. He squeezed the fibers over a flat rock until drops of clear water formed. He pointed for them to drink. Mary took a cautious sip. The water was cool and sweet, and it eased the dryness in her throat. Peter drank eagerly, the drops running down his chin. When they were done, the boy motioned for them to follow again. They left the pool behind, climbing a slope that rose higher than Mary expected. From the top, she could see a wide stretch of red sand ahead. It shimmered in the heat, making her eyes ache. The next part of the walk was the hardest yet. The sand was soft and deep. Every step sank, and it felt like they were climbing even when the ground was flat. Mary's legs grew heavy. Peter's face was flushed red, and sweat ran down his neck. The boy noticed. He slowed and led them to a flat rock that cast a narrow shadow. They sat there, breathing hard. From his pouch, the boy took out a handful of what looked like roasted seeds. Mary tasted one carefully. It was dry but had a nutty flavor, and it filled her mouth with a faint, pleasant oiliness. Peter ate without question, clearly too hungry to care. They rested for a while, but the boy did not let them stay long. He pointed to the sun, now sliding lower, and gestured that they needed to move. They followed him again, and Mary began to notice small things she had missed before: faint tracks in the sand, a bird feather caught on a bush, and the way the boy's head turned at even the smallest sound. He was alert to everything. After what felt like hours, they reached the base of a tall cliff. In its shadow was a cluster of caves. The boy led them into the largest one. It was cool inside, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and dry earth. In the corner lay a pile of ashes, and above them, the stone ceiling was darkened as if from many fires before. The boy set down the small animal he had been carrying. Mary realized it was a desert lizard, its skin pale and patterned like cracked stone. Without speaking, he began to gather dry twigs from a corner of the cave. He struck 2 stones together until sparks caught in the dry grass, and a small flame began to grow. Mary and Peter watched silently. The boy placed the lizard over the fire, turning it slowly. The smell was strong, almost like fish mixed with the scent of the burning wood. When it was ready, he tore it into small pieces and handed them each some. Mary hesitated for only a moment before taking a bite. The meat was chewy but warm, and after swallowing it, she felt a small burst of strength return. They ate quietly. Peter looked happier now, and for the first time that day, his face relaxed. For the rest of the afternoon, they stayed inside the cave. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying grains of sand that hissed softly against the rocks. The boy seemed calm but kept glancing at the entrance. Once, a shadow passed over the ground outside, a hawk gliding low in the golden light. As evening came, the desert air cooled quickly. The boy stepped to the mouth of the cave and pointed upward. The first stars were beginning to appear. Mary followed him outside for a moment and looked at the sky. The vast darkness stretched in every direction, sprinkled with light. She thought of Uncle Keith. Was he still waiting in Adelaide? Did he believe the news that there were no survivors? She hoped someone was still searching. Back inside, Peter curled up near the fire, his eyes already closing. Mary lay down beside him, the ground hard but cool. Sleep did not come easily. She kept listening to the night sounds, the sigh of the wind, the dry rustle of leaves, and far away, the high, thin howl of a dingo. Before she drifted off, she made herself a promise. Tomorrow, she would try to ask the boy, by signs if needed, whether he could lead them to a road, a camp, or any place where people might help. They could not stay in the desert forever. For now, though, she let her eyes close, thankful for the fire, the cave, and the silent guide who had, at least for today, kept them alive. When Mary opened her eyes the next morning, the cave was filled with pale golden light. The air was cooler than it had been the day before, but she could already feel the heat starting to build. The fire had burned down to a small pile of gray ash. Peter was still asleep beside her, one arm resting over his face to block the sunlight. The boy was gone. For a moment, Mary's heart began to pound. Had he left them while they slept? The thought of being alone again made her chest feel tight. But then she heard the faint crunch of footsteps outside. The boy appeared in the cave entrance, carrying a bundle of long green stems. His face was calm, as if the morning were just another part of his quiet routine. He knelt near the ashes, placed the stems on the ground, and began peeling them with quick, sure hands. Inside the thick skin was a soft, damp center. He broke it into pieces and handed some to Mary and Peter, motioning for them to chew. The taste was fresh, almost sweet, and the cool moisture spread through Mary's mouth. It wasn't much, but it eased the dryness in her throat. Peter chewed noisily and gave the boy a shy smile. The boy didn't smile back, but his eyes softened for a moment. After they had eaten, the boy pointed toward the rising sun. He made a walking gesture with his fingers, then set off without waiting for an answer. Mary helped Peter stand, and they followed. They walked for hours, the ground changing slowly beneath their feet. The soft red sand gave way to harder earth dotted with pale green bushes. Some had long, sharp spines, and Mary warned Peter not to touch them. In the distance, the land rose into low ridges, their edges glowing in the sunlight. Mary began to notice more signs of life. She saw the neat hopping tracks of kangaroos, the tiny prints of birds, and the long winding trails of snakes. Once, a large lizard darted across their path, its tail leaving a quick line in the dust. The heat grew heavier with each hour. Peter's steps slowed, and his shoulders drooped. Mary tried to keep him moving by telling him stories about home, about their mother's cooking, their father's jokes, the small park where they used to play. But after a while, her voice grew dry, and she had to save her breath. The boy led them to a patch of shade under a large boulder. They sat on the warm ground, drinking the last drops of water from their bottle. From his pouch, the boy brought out a handful of roasted seeds, passing them around. The taste was dry but filled Mary with a little more strength. When the shadows shifted, the boy stood and motioned again. They followed him down into a wide, dry riverbed. Mary felt the ground under her feet become smoother, almost polished by past floods. The boy stopped suddenly, crouched, and listened. Then he began walking along the riverbed's curve. It was then that Mary heard something strange, a faint, steady hum. At first she thought it was the wind, but the sound grew louder. It had a rhythm, like an engine. The boy turned to them, his eyes brighter now, and pointed ahead. Mary's heart began to race. Could it be a car? They climbed a low bank, and from the top Mary saw a narrow dirt track stretching into the distance. Far along it, a faint cloud of dust was moving toward them. "It's someone!" Mary cried, grabbing Peter's hand. The boy began waving his arms high over his head. Mary and Peter did the same. The dust cloud grew larger until the shape of a small truck came into view. It slowed, then stopped a short distance away. A man in a wide-brimmed hat climbed down from the driver's seat. His face was lined and sunburned, but his eyes were kind. "Good heavens," he said, looking from Mary to Peter. "Are you kids from that missing plane?" Mary's voice caught in her throat. She could only nod. The man hurried to the back of the truck and pulled out 2 bottles of water. Mary drank slowly, the cool liquid washing away the dryness that had been with her for days. Peter gulped his so quickly that the man had to take it from him for a moment. "What about your friend?" the man asked, nodding, toward the boy. Mary turned, but the boy was already stepping back. His face was calm, but there was a distance in his eyes, as if he had never intended to leave the desert. "Wait!" Mary called, taking a step toward him. The boy shook his head. He touched his chest lightly, then pointed toward the hills in the distance. It was his way of saying he belonged here. The man placed a hand on Mary's shoulder. "Best let him go, miss. This is his home." Mary stood still, watching as the boy turned away. He walked with the same quiet, steady steps as before, his small figure blending into the heat and light until he was gone. The ride to the nearest town felt like a dream. The truck bumped and rattled along the track, the wind rushing past their faces. Mary sat in the back with Peter, holding his hand. Neither of them spoke much. She kept looking at the horizon, half expecting to see the boy walking there, a part of the desert that would never leave. When they reached the town, people came out to see them. A police officer took their names and spoke into a radio. They were taken to a small clinic where a nurse cleaned the cuts on their hands and feet and gave them food. Mary ate slowly, still thinking about the long days and nights they had spent in the wild. 2 days later, they were reunited with Uncle Keith in Adelaide. The moment he saw them, he ran forward and pulled them both into his arms. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, his voice shaking. That night, in a real bed with a roof overhead, Mary lay awake for a long time. She thought of the boy, how he had found them, shared his food, and guided them to safety without speaking their language. The desert had been cruel, but it had also given them a friend who had saved their lives. Mary never saw him again, but in her heart, she knew he was still out there, walking the same land under the same stars, carrying the knowledge of survival that few people in the world would ever understand. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.